Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, the media side of the Iran story. Who is saying what about the new president and his message to Washington and the world? The Israelis who don't think there are enough news channels out there and have just given us another one.
Welcome to the Morning Edition, live from Tel Aviv.
We take a look at I-24 News. It looks like it was one and done for a South Africa-based news channel aimed at Zimbabwe. First TV may have made its last broadcast. And going out in style. That's our web video of the week. Every year when world leaders gather to address the UN General Assembly, the media kick into gear. This year, Iran's new president, Hassan Rouhani, used the occasion to mount a diplomatic offensive aimed at reshaping Iran's image. Distancing himself from his predecessor, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, Rouhani went on a carefully orchestrated PR blitz that cast him as media savvy and open to dialogue. The Washington Post published an op-ed written by Rouhani, a watershed moment for the U.S. media and its relations with the Islamic Republic, and one which was echoed by the Iranian media, which took the highly unusual step of interviewing an American diplomat. Ahmadinejad's time in office saw a factionalized domestic media in Iran that reflected the country's political divisions. But this time round, for the most part, those ideologically disparate media outlets fell into line with the new dominant political rhetoric of reconciliation. And then there was the Israeli counter-offensive. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who used the UN stage to tell those at home and abroad that Iran's media push was nothing more than a charm offensive, and a dangerous one at that. Our starting point this week is the media beehive that is the UN headquarters in New York City. He's been in the job for 2 months, but the gathering at the UN was, for all intents and purposes, Hassan Rouhani's debut on the world stage. It provided him with 26 minutes to deliver his speech, unfiltered, through whatever news outlet chose to carry it. And the media he did before and after the speech was also part of the strategy. He was busy.
He, I think, as expected, really blitzed the media while he was here. He spoke to Charlie Rose. He spoke to CNN's correspondent.
I want to ask you what it feels like to be what some people have called the it man of this UNGA.
And he spoke to NBC on the eve of his visit, as well as a number of other newspaper interviews and engagement in a sort of more casual format over breakfast with both web and print and broadcast media during his trip here. All of that, I think, really helped to define the president as someone quite different than his predecessor.
One fundamental difference between the Rouhani team and the Ahmadinejad team is their special attention to the media. Ahmadinejad used his speeches to insist on the values and the policies he believed in, so that they were heard in the General Assembly. It wasn't important to him how much this message was getting through to his audience or how much they were understood. By contrast, Rouhani's intention was for his values and the policies of the Islamic Republic to be expressed within the bounds of accepted and easily understood international norms, so that audiences could understand them and relate to them.
In Israel, everything that Rouhani does and says is really viewed as a facade. Across the board in Israeli media, they ask immediately, who is he trying to pull a fast one on?
מתברר יותר ויותר שלא רק בישראל חוששים מההתחממות ביחסים בין הנשיא אובמה וארצות הברית לאיראן.
The president of the United States is portrayed as naive. There's even a political cartoon that shows Netanyahu asking Obama, what kind of mushrooms are you on? But then out the window you see a mushroom cloud of a nuclear explosion. And so Rouhani is really portrayed as a shyster, as a trickster in the Israeli media, as being really no different than Ahmadinejad.
It may be premature to conclude that Rouhani will prove to be substantively different from his predecessor. However, in terms of style, particularly in the use of new media like Twitter, he could not be more different than Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, whether Rouhani is communicating with Iranians, Americans, or, for that matter, Israelis.
The first real exciting moment came when that account tweeted Happy New Year greetings to all the world's Jews on the occasion of Rosh Hashanah a few weeks ago. The fact that the Twitter account was used to break the news of the unprecedented phone call between the two presidents, I think was fascinating, and frankly had all those of us who are interested in Iran glued to our Twitter accounts. Clearly he's trying to engage internationally, engage with young Iranians, demonstrate that this is not your father's Islamic Republic.
Use of tweets and Facebook shows an understanding of the reality that it's possible to reach public opinion through social media. The speed at which this news was transmitted was a very skilled and effective move, that they tweeted this immediately, because the importance is that in Twitter there are many users who will understand the newsworthiness of this occurrence, because nothing like it had happened in the past 34 years.
Apparently, our expectations of diplomacy have changed in a way that we are expecting a sort of instant diplomacy, like the very process of courtship that, because of the advance of social media and online dating sites, has changed. For example, the courtship is not anymore that sort of kind of a slow and gradual process, rather instant messaging and then instant hookups. So apparently the same attention has been given to diplomacy as if overnight miracles can happen.
President Rouhani does not speak for all of Iran. As a moderate, he would not have expected the support of conservative papers such as Kayhan, which wrote that the phone call with President Obama was Rouhani showing signs of weakness. Or Raja, an online site, which said the call was useless and urged Rouhani to forget about trying to be a revolutionary and at least try to be a diplomat.
It's really important for us to properly understand this diversity of opinions. Kayhan newspaper and the Fars news agency, and also the Javan newspaper, these are from a side of the Iranian media spectrum that is extremely suspicious of the actions of the United States. However, what proportion of society they represent, I do not know. But what I do know is that a decisive majority voted for Mr. Rouhani.
Their criticism was much more muted. It was open questioning of the value and the utility of doing this now, rather than suggesting that it was purely inviolable and completely out of bounds for any Iranian leader to speak to an American counterpart.
Reformist media was to a degree even overexcited. They all published the phone conversation on their very front page with the pictures of President Rouhani and Obama together. The moderate platforms for conservative principalist faction in Iran, like websites such as tabnak.ir, such as Aleph.ir, were generally supportive of Rouhani's position. There were, again, just mild cautions, warnings that we should be careful.
This is a story with plenty of moving parts in Tehran, Washington, and Tel Aviv. The media in all three capitals are playing their part. As usual, they provide instant analysis.
Just how short is this window?
And demand instant answers. But the diplomatic freeze between Iran and America has been 34 years in the making, and it will take more than a few tweets from a new president and a phone call to change that. It is a warming trend. As for the long-term forecast, there really isn't one. Our Global Village Voice is now on the coverage of the Iran story.
Visibly, the U.S. government has welcomed Iran's Twitter diplomacy by following Rouhani's Twitter account. To note, social media engagement between the two countries started through YouTube with Obama's Iranian New Year greeting in 2009 to fix the US's image after the Bush years. Rouhani is doing the same through Twitter for damage control after the Ahmadinejad years.
So far, Rouhani's media behavior says, hey, I got a round table and a few chairs. Let's sit and talk and see if we get somewhere. At the international level, I think he's trying to appeal to the West. So far, what he said and the way he acted in the media is consistent with who he is. A pragmatic diplomat and a very well-educated leader who is willing to negotiate on urgent issues. He's showing Iran's gentle side, I think. He's trying to build confidence.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. A couple of months back, we told you about First TV, Zimbabwe's only independent TV station, which broadcasted into the country from neighboring South Africa and launched just prior to the Zimbabwean presidential elections in July. First TV is now off the air, citing financial problems. Broadcasting online and via satellite from a location it did not want disclosed, the privately owned network brought a new element to a media landscape dominated by the Zimbabwean Broadcasting Corporation, ZBC. ZBC is Zimbabwe's only domestic TV channel and has openly backed President Robert Mugabe. First TV says it will stay off the air while it figures out a more sustainable economic model. No one exactly knows where the channel's money came from, but the man in charge is Andrew Chadwick. He's a former aide to Morgan Tsvangirai, the head of the Movement for Democratic Change and President Mugabe's main political rival. The channel was not popular with the ruling party. Back when it launched, Zimbabwe's Information Minister George Charamba said, "We will be taking decisions mindful of the need to cripple this pirate television broadcast station." Turns out they didn't have to. Here's a prediction for what it's worth, since it's pure speculation on our part. If First TV ever comes back, it will probably appear just prior to the next time Zimbabweans vote for a president. In Sudan, the government has been accused of a campaign of censorship over recent political protests there. Since September 22nd, demonstrators have taken to the streets of Khartoum over hikes in the price of fuel. The protests triggered a media crackdown. The latest to be hit is the country's largest daily newspaper, Al Intiba. Al Intiba was reportedly ordered shut down after it refused to depict protesters as saboteurs against the al-Bashir government. Prior to that, the offices of the pan-Arab news network Al Arabiya and Sky News Arabia were closed. The internet was shut down, and newspapers were ordered to temporarily cease publication. There have also been allegations of threats and harassment against journalists and reports that newspaper editors were hauled before the country's security services and ordered not to publish anything on the story that did not come from the government. Defending the measures taken, Sudan's Foreign Minister Ali Karti said, "If the revolution is created by media, we have to be serious in dealing with it." The media freedom group Reporters Without Borders countered with this: "The measures taken by the government show the extremes to which it is ready to go to hold on to power. This censorship is both totally unacceptable and pointless, given that the protests are continuing." In Italy, the leader of the main opposition party there, who's out to shake up politics, is now turning on the Italian media. Beppe Grillo, a comedian and blogger turned politician, led his followers from the Five Star movement as they stormed the headquarters of RAI, Italy's national public broadcaster. They were protesting the cozy relationship between RAI and the political powers that be. Grillo and several of his MPs occupied the building entrance, demanded to see the head of RAI, and lambasted the organization. He said RAI news programs manipulate information, misleading millions of viewers. This is why we stand in 70th place in the freedom of the press ranking. The protest was triggered by this interview on RAI with Prime Minister Enrico Letta, after which Grillo attacked the journalists involved for letting the politician get away with lying about changes to the electoral system. RAI's Director General, Luigi Gubitosi, has agreed to meet with Grillo. Over the past half-dozen years or so, media consumers have seen the launch of a host of new global English-language 24-hour news channels. There's this one, bankrolled by Qatar, which made its debut in 2006. Since then, Russia, France, Iran, and China have all got in on the act. The latest country to broadcast its perspective to the rest of the world is Israel. I-24 News has been on the air for 3 months now, and its target audience is clearly not Israeli. It broadcasts in 3 languages, none of them Hebrew. But if this really is a soft power push, it's different in that, unlike those other new news channels, there is no government money involved, or so the channel says. The Listening Post's Flo Phillips now from the banks of the Mediterranean on I-24, its mission and its prospects of finding an audience.
The headquarters of I-24 News, perched on the edge of the port of Jaffa, an ancient gateway to the region, the exact spot where Theodor Herzl, founding father of Zionism, journalist by trade, is said to have first landed at the end of the 19th century. A fitting location for Israel to be broadcasting its message, its version of events, to the rest of the world.
Good morning, I'm Meredith Ross, and these are today's headlines.
One of the major debates in Israel is what to do about Israeli hasbara. Hasbara means information, means propaganda, means public diplomacy. And there is a common belief by most Israelis that Israeli Hasbara is terrible.
The mission of his channel is to cover the international topics with an Israeli perspective.
What should Israel do when it comes to the Iranian threat?
We want to explain to the world the Israeli society point of view. We want to show that we can connect Israel to the world and connect the world to the Israeli reality and society.
To many, that may sound like state propaganda, but the channel founders insist that they haven't received a penny from the state, that they're entirely privately funded. And when I spoke to reporters at the channel, they also told me that they're given complete freedom to pursue whatever story they want. The channel's very first story, the announcement of the European Union, that they issued a directive prohibiting the financing of institutions in the Jewish settlements. Those news were very embarrassing for the Israeli government. And so just the fact that they chose to lead with that for their very first edition shows something about the sort of the angle through which they cover stories.
But really, how different is I-24? It's an Israeli channel that doesn't broadcast in Hebrew, instead in French, English and Arabic. And while other domestic channels will put Arab-Israeli voices on the air, I-24 puts one in the anchor chair.
Hello and welcome back. This is the evening edition. I'm Lucia Rishan.
And has her slug it out with a Jewish settler live on primetime television.
Although I'm having you here in the studio, and I'm Arab, and I don't think that there is a problem of you being here in the studio.
But we are living together.
But we are living together.
It's by no means the first time that Israelis and Arabs have worked together in a newsroom. There are Arabs in every newsroom in Israel, but it definitely is the first time that Arab Israelis have had their own format, their own desk, their own place to really speak their mind. As opposed to major international networks like the BBC and Al Jazeera, what they do is they try to humanize the Israeli side of the stories.
When we were talking about the peace talks, all the news channels said it's easy for Israel to release prisoners. But you have to understand that it's a sacrifice for the Israeli people. And you don't see that in other news channels. And we organize a lot of debates inside this channel with, for example, a mother who lost her son in a bomb attack, or a father who lost his daughter. And there was a discussion in our studio here to understand if for peace they can do the sacrifice. The father said no. The mother said yes.
There has to be reconciliation.
This is a concrete example about what is the mission of I-24 News.
In the quest to reach global audiences through a national media outlet, Israel is relatively late to the game. Countries increasingly seek to broadcast their own perspectives to the world. There is China's CCTV, Iran's Press TV, France 24, Russia Today, and Al Jazeera. But what's different about I-24 News is that this is not, at least on the surface, an Israeli government initiative. I-24 says it receives no government money, that all of the backing for the channel comes from private investors.
I-24 News is entirely privately funded, primarily by this French-Israeli businessman by the name of Patrick Drahi. Drahi owns several telecommunication companies, both in France and in Israel. He tends to shy away from the media. He doesn't give many interviews, but his estimated net worth is somewhere north of 600 million euros.
Many of these investors look at Israel beyond the economic element. They want to be involved in Israeli life. They want to influence the Israeli policy. The diaspora of the Jews see Israel as their homeland, and they want to have some impact on that, whether they come from the left or from the right. So it's a really intellectual, emotional, national, psychological investment in Israel that these people have, beyond economic interests.
We have people who are funding this channel because they think that it's about time also to listen another voice from the Middle East, talking about Israel. And I want to show to the Arabic people, to the African people, to the European people, that when we are talking about economy, when we are talking about culture, when we are talking about sport, for example, we can connect all the population because you can think the same.
The founders of I-24 make much of the fact that the channel receives no government money, holds no political affiliation, and therefore pledges to cover the news objectively. But if that really is the case, how can the channel, a startup still under construction, with holes in the ceilings and typos in the tickers, begin to compete with the news-gathering operations of incumbent cable networks.
If you watch I-24 and you compare it to the coverage of other major networks like the BBC, like Al Jazeera, like France 24, most of the time they're covering the same stories. They have the same lead stories, the same headlines, but they're really lacking in staff around the world. They have a newsroom in Israel, but they have no full-time staff in other countries. While other stations may have people on the ground, what I-24 has to do is show stock footage.
It bills itself as this sort of international venture, and yet because it's based out of Israel, they're unable to cover many of the stories that perhaps they would like to. For example, it's almost impossible for an Israeli news organization to send reporters out to Gaza, let alone Lebanon or Egypt. They cover recent developments coming out of Syria quite extensively, and yet they're unable to have a reporter on the ground.
Clearly then, for a channel that boasts it is dedicating roughly 70% of its coverage to international news, it could be a while before the I in I-24 News stands for international. It may well stand for Israel.
Good evening. Bonsoir.
And 3 months after going on air, I-24 has done a pretty good job at telling the Israeli side of the story. Israeli Hasbara around the world. How far will the channel dare to go?
There are absolutely going to be editorial red lines, whether they admit it or not. I really can't imagine a scenario in which they allow someone to come into the station and openly criticize Israel or openly question its right to exist. I believe they'll get up to a point. But to actually have someone come in and say things that are anti-Semitic or question the right of Israel to be in the region in the first place and be its own independent country, I definitely can't see that happening on air.
That would make the I in I-24 inconceivable, or at the very least, ill-advised. As it stands now, I-24 is doing exactly what it says it is, broadcasting news and information from Israel to the world 24 hours a day.
Don't go anywhere. Stay with us.
More Global Village Voices now on the Israeli contribution to the world of 24-hour news.
When I first heard about the launching of I-24 News, I thought that's about time. I have a feeling that people all over the world are starting to perceive Israel and the Middle East in a different way. And for this purpose, I believe that I-24 News can be a very good channel.
I think I-24 is a positive force in Middle East reporting. First of all, it's a totally private initiative. It's not sponsored or connected to any government or any royal family. It's just a private businessman. Second of all, I think competition helps people strive to be their best. And part of this competition is being able to show different views and different perspectives on the news. And people are thirsting for news about the Middle East in these turbulent times. I-24 just adds another aspect that I think people will be interested in seeing.
Finally, anyone who's ever been unhappy in their job, overworked, and underappreciated has probably dreamed of making a grand exit, one final act of defiance after years of taking orders. Here's one way to do that. It was created by a 25-year-old woman named Marina Schifrin. Instead of handing in a plain old letter of resignation, she uploaded a video of resignation that's now gone viral. The kicker is that the company she was quitting, Next Media Animation, NMA in Taiwan, specializes in making viral videos. So NMA then posted a response, but it hasn't got anywhere near as much attention. With more than 8 million hits online, an interpretive dance for my boss has clearly touched a nerve among unhappy workers everywhere. It's our web video of the week. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.